Let's make sure you have a serial for it. So, here. Okay. It'll reach. I got extra cable. How's that?
How the new glasses? Can you see?
And you should have USB over there.
You know what? The funny thing is, I put his glasses on.
RJ5 is over here. We have
User
Louis.
250. I can read with this 125.
Android? Android? Yeah, Max Android.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
Oh man.
I feel so bad.
Yeah.
I don't know the county, but I hear they're very big.
Oh, they're good.
They are
family.
awesome.
You know, and there was never anybody who put more effort into their kids than them. You know, it wasn't like a dysfunctional family or anything like that.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
I have done an urgency ordinance. I don't know if you just published
You
it.
never know.
Yeah, there's, it's got to be published within 15 days.
Okay, do I have the summary published? Because the
It's
ordinance
something that
itself is
apparently
not.
we've been contemplating for well over a year.
I'm sorry,
Wasn't
say that
something
again.
that
Will you
Just
have
came
to
up-
publish
just
a
came up
summary
and
of the ordinance?
whatever, and
Or do you want to
part
publish
of
the
it
whole
was
thing because
the
that's going to cost some
correction.
money?
That, you know,
We'll talk afterwards.
just
There's plenty of time
keeping up with the
to
old
discuss that, but we need to publish next Tuesday.
I wonder.
So,
I mean, that's
what you need before
I mean, you're talking
whatever
about
deadline is.
family so close.
Fair enough.
I haven't done one in a long time.
Jim and
Yeah.
Nicole are
Will
just
it-
like awesome people. I mean,
Oh, there's so who's involved, like it's
You need a
Oh,
high
yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
almost a Eagle
Hi,
Scout.
Mom. Hi, Mom.
His brother's an Eagle Scout.
It's going on.
Matter.
You know? Ruin some people's lives.
I had to be in a church.
That's what I mean. They'll never get over that.
How do you get back in that room?
How would you go back in the house?
You don't.
You know,
Uh,
I don't think we can
I
imagine,
even imagine.
you know, as much as we try to understand it, we can't.
No. Their lives are ruined.
Probably some
Well.
older than you, but
You wouldn't be
Depends
for
on
me,
experience.
Bob.
Their lives definitely have changed.
It was
Hopefully they
just
can.
Hi, Nick.
I guess we're about ready,
How
huh?
are you?
Susan, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
You know each other from the other day?
Yeah.
Look at that, boss. 14 seconds late.
17. I think Violet.
Bring the meeting to order. Any public comment? Seeing none, items, announcement items to be discussed in closed session.
Mr. Chairman, the board will be meeting in closed session for
A phone call.
a conference.
Well, it cost me.
Conference call.
Tom, don't worry, it cost him $20 at the last Rotary
Good,
meeting for,
good.
I told him, I says, Tom Hamlin wanted him fine, so
I
I
support
support
that.
All right. We'll be meeting in closed session for a conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54957.9, Peterson versus Nielsen, Lassen Works, Lassen County Board of Supervisors, Lassen Superior Court Case Number 59089, for a conference with real property negotiator, location 2950 Riverside Drive, Susanville, California, negotiator Richard Egan, subject provide direction to property negotiator regarding price determination of potential purchase or lease, negotiating with Mr. Bill Hedrick on behalf of real property owner. Also, we'll be meeting for a conference with labor negotiator Rick Hague telephonically. This may include the following bargaining units: Lassen County Peace Officers Association, Lassen County Peace Officers Supervisors Association, Lassen County Peace Officers Management Association, and Lassen County Deputy Sheriff's Association.
Okay, with that, we will go into closed session. Comedy Lane, like.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Almighty God, we pray this day for your ever-enduring guidance. We ask you to clothe us in wisdom and fortitude that we may disperse our knowledge and fact intelligently among all humanity of whom we serve. Amen. Okay, on to the items. Closed session.
Mr. Chairman, the board met in closed session for a conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Peterson versus Nielsen, Lassen Works, Lassen County Board of Supervisors, Lassen Superior Court Case number 59089. Also met with a conference with real property negotiator, location 2950 Riverside Drive, Susanville, California. Negotiator CAO Richard Egan, subject to provide direction to property negotiator regarding price terms of potential purchase or lease. Negotiator Mr. Bill Hydrick on behalf of the real property owner. Also met for conference with labor negotiator Rick Hague telephonically. These include the following bargaining units: Lassen County Peace Officers Association, Lassen County Peace Officers Supervisors Association, Lassen County Peace Officers Management Association, and Lassen County Deputy Sheriff's Association. There was no reportable action.
Thank you. Okay, agenda approval, additions and resolution. I move to approve.
Second. I have a request to adjourn our meeting being in Chuck Simmons.
Who was it?
Chuck Simmons.
Jeff Simmons, and then Max Damlin. Okay, with that, we have a motion. Second. You get a second?
I second.
Okay, motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Ayes have it. Public comment. Anybody wish to address the board on any items not on the agenda or even on the agenda at this time? Seeing none, we move on. Okay, let's go to F1, Atlantic Litchfield Fire Department District. Vacancy.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, on F1, Spanish Litchfield Fire Protection District, I think that there was some question last week as we went into this agenda item as to whether or not there was actually one vacancy or two. And consequently, if there were, because there were two applicants for what was initially thought to only be one open seat, and now and then there was a question about maybe a second seat, we postponed it to this week. I think that question has been answered. I think we've confirmed that there is only one open seat at this time. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? Yes. And consequently, we have two applicants, and they have it.
Do you have any appointment?
I make the motion to accept Jane Nickerson.
Do you have a second? Motion and second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, ayes have it. Information consent calendar, is there anything anybody wishes to take off and to speak about separately? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the information consent calendar?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Ayes have it.
Seems to be needed.
Okay, we'll go to,
You're mumbling over there.
you hear mumbling?
I got a from all day about the other school over in G3.
Okay, I guess H1, marijuana, urgency, open argument.
And so, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, H1, we're back to the marijuana cultivation discussion. We had a fairly lengthy conversation last week, and based on my notes and recollection as to what happened during that meeting, I attempted to incorporate that into no longer a draft, but a proposed final ordinance that you have in front of you here today. And that has also been agendized for action, if that's your choice. The proposed action is adoption of the draft ordinance, adoption of the ordinance as an urgency action. It incorporates findings pursuant to Government Code 25213, which contemplates urgent action. Essentially, the growing season is upon us, and being proposed as an urgency action so as to essentially stem the impacts that your constituents face resulting from outdoor growing. That's forthcoming. And so that is the ordinance. I'm happy to take any questions. Again, I attempted to, and really the meat of the ordinance is the conditions of cultivation. There were a couple other changes. I did remove the misdemeanor provision based on direction from the board in references to being prosecuted as a misdemeanor. And the ordinance retains its other enforcement provisions aside from that, including administrative penalties and the like. And so, but really the conversation focused last week on the conditions of cultivation. The conditions of cultivation, we were talking about different parcel sizes and trying to iron that out, and plant counts on those parcel sizes. I tried to effectively include that in the conditions of cultivation, and hope I did so. I think I've had contact with one board member since. I don't know if I got it wrong or if the board member got it wrong. I don't know. And so, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I will start off if that board member was me, and I don't know either if it's something I overlooked or on the conditions of cultivation. We got tier 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yes, sir.
And the first sentence of each one, I'll take this tier 3 for instance. Each person who resides on premises of 11 acres inside up to 40 acres inside may grow no more than 24 marijuana plants indoors or outdoors for their own personal consumption. Each one of these start off for their own personal consumption.
And I
intended that no individual grower could use more than 12 of them plants on whatever tier it be for themselves. But the other plants they grow over 12 must be for a patient.
Yeah, and that was the question you had presented to me, and I had understood it a different way when we had come out at the meeting last week and had written it that way. And so,
I don't know how the rest of the board has seen it.
My recollection from the discussion was that was what Mr. Isles said, and I think that's, narrowing it down to now, if somebody grows the 72 plants on the biggest parcel, and they want to give their 12 to use for somebody else, in terms of the patient that they're caring for, because they don't, use marijuana, then that's their prerogative. But I think that the personal consumption that they would have or use would be limited to 12 based on...
Limited to 12 on all 4 tiers. Anything after that, you have to have a patient come to you with a qualified card and all the...
And the max that could be grown for each individualized patient could be 12 as well, correct?
And the theory behind the 72 is that gives you 5 patients that you could grow for plus yourself.
Understood.
I don't think it should be each person. You could have 4 people that are married on a...
Well,
It's max for the parcel.
I've expressed it in the language of the conditions of cultivation that in a way that it's capped per premises.
Per premises.
Yes,
Yeah.
per premises. Yeah. So that change can easily be affected. So there was one other question. I'm happy to answer the board's questions.
I had one other one. It's on page 2 under G.
Page 2.
Where you talk about the cultivation within location or premises within 1,000 feet of the schools, and you added parks of daycare. I was pretty adamant that we wanted to have existing schools, parks, or licensed daycare. In other words, it's important that word existing be in there. So that sets up the dynamic later that if the daycare, now schools and parks aren't going to pick up and move relatively easily, but a daycare facility can move around. They're pretty flexible with their locations. So if you get somebody who meets the test of the ordinance and has got a pre-existing legitimate operation, and then the daycare decides to move in next to them and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that because you're within 1,000 feet of a daycare facility that came after the grower establishment. So it's just kind of the same thing like an airport or a farmer. You can't just move in next to a farm. That's why we have a right to farm ordinance, is that, you know, the farming operation takes precedent. And if you're inconvenienced by being located next to whatever it is that you're objecting to, and you moved in after the fact, you've got two choices: learn to live with it or relocate to somewhere where you're happier. But to force a grower who establishes themselves in a legitimate fashion under the ordinance to be impinged upon, and the city is even considering to the extreme that when it comes to licensing daycare, if a daycare comes in and says we want to locate here and there's already a pre-existing marijuana facility happening, they're going to deny the license to the daycare. In other words, precluding the daycare from being within 1,000 feet of an existing marijuana. So it works both ways. And the idea being is, if you're going to have it, it needs to be fair for both sides. If you're going to tell a marijuana person they can't be within 1,000 feet of a daycare facility because of some sort of nebulous reason, the same rule applies to the daycare people. You can't be within 1,000 feet of an existing marijuana. So it has to be both ways.
And so I tried to deal with that related to the licensed daycare facilities.
And I appreciate that later
Yes, sir.
on, but I think in this particular paragraph, where having the word existing before schools, parks, or licensed daycare is pretty important to establish that premise.
Okay.
To protect the marijuana folks from being impacted upon by marauding daycare facilities.
What happens if we get a growth spurt?
I'm thinking of the capital commercial
What
guy.
happens if we get a growth spurt and there's a necessity for a school? Are we not going to be able to build a school because there's a marijuana grow?
Well, it could theoretically affect that if they're
That's
looking at
not-
citing a new school and there's an let's say that's not cool, that's not good, then fine. Then why do you limit the marijuana from moving in next to a school or a park? I mean, in other words, if you're going to take the position that that's not a healthy mix for whatever the variety of reasons, you can have 1,000 people with 1,000 reasons why that's not a good idea. Okay, then it has to be, it cuts both ways. You can't do it one way against one set, but let the other set go free. So a school would have to rethink its plans if it's wanting to relocate and find themselves within close proximity of a well-established marijuana farm.
So this ordinance would not preclude a school or a daycare facility or the establishment of a park from moving within 1,000-foot zone of an existing established marijuana grove. What it would say, and what it does say, is that you then can't complain about any impact upon such an operation and expect the government to enforce this ordinance against that grove if you move in that zone.
Let me use a different example, because this is a planning thing. It wasn't that many years ago we had a pig farm. I think it was Darrell Wood that was running it out there on the backside of Susanville Municipal Airport. And Ellis Green, who owned the garbage company at the time, this is long before Lassen Waste, long before CNS Waste and all this, dating myself now. But he decided to move his operation, and he was within a close proximity where this pig farm was, and he didn't like the smell of it. And so he wanted to complain and shut down the pig farm. But the pig farm was there long before the garbage guy came along, and he kind of lost his battle. You know, the pig farm prevailed. The garbage guy, either you live with the smell, if that's what your problem is, or you relocate to where you can be happier. But you can't move in on an existing operation and shut them down because you just happen not to like who they are.
Okay, any new changes or anything for this?
Can I make sure I understand, though, on that issue before we move to another, if we could, please, sir?
Yes, sir.
And that is that on page 2 of the proposed ordinance, under G, I would include existing.
After the word 1,000 feet of existing, before you say
schools, public parks, and licensed daycare facilities. Now, in the conditions of cultivation, though, the actual, I mean, what you're talking about in G on page 2 is essentially findings and purpose. That's essentially your legislative intent when you're making this law, because that's what we're doing. We're making law here. And you know, like I know, that at the beginning of every statute, or generally bigger statutes, have a statement of legislative intent. And that's what the G section has. That's not really the meat of the ordinance, but it does give some guidance as to what you were thinking when you adopted it. But under the conditions of cultivation, that's really the enforcement for, or the conditions under which marijuana may be cultivated. And under E on page 6, do you want to include that language related to existing schools, public parks as well? Because I've already included a provision related to existing licensed daycare, but do you want to expand that to schools and public parks? I was operating on the premise when we concluded our conversations last week that public parks and schools are not the kinds of things that are going to pick up and move with, like marauding daycare providers, or as frequently as them. But if you want, I will include that.
If you can run with the land, I can roll.
And so, that's my question is do you want the conditions of cultivation to express that, if a school as well as a public park moves within 1,000 feet of an established grow, that then this ordinance would not be able to be imposed upon the established grow,
Right.
As well.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you propose.
I can make that happen.
Insert the word existing in there, 1,000 feet of any existing.
I want to look at it perhaps on a break. My request is going to be, that what we do here today, and I'm hoping we go with this, I'll take whatever direction you want to give me. That I accept from you whatever proposed final changes we get to this, receive public input, that we then perhaps take a break. I've got this thing on the thumb drive, and I'm prepared to make those changes today, this morning, perhaps on a break or over the lunch hour or something of the like. Yes, sir.
Give us a clean copy.
Yes, sir. And adopt this thing,
Sounds good.
if that's your pleasure.
That's a pleasure.
Now,
C1, no,
C1.
on less than an acre.
Yes, sir. Let me. I'm sorry. Can I? Let me make a note.
Cultivation.
I'm trying to keep up. Yes, sir.
Where we said there's no outdoor cultivation on less than an acre,
Yes, sir.
can we change that to 6 plants on outdoors on less than an acre?
If that's the pleasure of the board.
Can we go to public comment?
Sure.
His meeting.
Do you have anything to do anyone doing at this point?
So let me make sure I understand.
All we know.
Let me. Can you be more specific, Mr. Supervisor Hempel? 6 plants outdoors. So essentially, what you are wanting to consider or propose is the possibility that C1, for premises less than 1 acre in size, that there be no outdoor cultivation ban, that essentially one could grow 6 plants outdoor?
Yes.
Okay, what about the 12 plants indoors? Would you want that to remain the same, or would you want that to be 6 plants indoors?
But also we'd want the fence issue and the sightline issue and all
Yeah,
that
and
stuff.
that,
all
yeah.
in there, but
Well, I think what he's proposing is you leave the 12 plant max for the 1 acre or less, but no more than 6 of those 12 plants could be grown outdoors.
outside, exactly.
I think that's what I just heard him say.
Okay, so how many plants max for parcels less than an acre?
12.
12. Okay, and 6 of those could be grown outdoors.
Outdoors, yes.
Okay.
A maximum of 6.
Maximum 6.
Okay. And so 12 could be grown indoors with none outdoors, or 6 outdoors and 6 indoors.
Or they could do 12 indoors.
And if 6 are grown outdoors, they'd be subject to the same fencing requirement?
Yes.
Okay. And what about a setback? Because we did talk about setbacks, but it may be different, because under 2, you have parcels from 1 acre to 11 acres in size, and those are, of course, larger than the smaller parcels, and so...
Didn't we assume that the setbacks would be the same as the building code on
well, what we said was...
It's 50 feet from an adjoining dwelling. Now, the dwelling on the parcel doesn't count, but if you've got a neighbor that's built up close to the property line,
There's
say
20-foot
10 feet,
setbacks.
normally it would be 20-foot setback, but if you have a house that's within 10 feet of their property line, okay, which is a normal, like a city setback, then you're going to have 40 feet going into the adjoining, your parcel before, in other words, that road can't be within 50 feet.
And that's what we established last
We
week,
established
was
that last
a 20-foot setback from property
It's
lines.
not that big of a problem when you deal with a larger parcel. But I guarantee you, when you get into the smaller parcels like
That's
you
when the
do
problems
in like
happen.
Lake Forest or Janesville, I mean like here in Susanville, if I had a 6 plant were allowed, and that was 15 feet out my bedroom window because they can encroach that far, that becomes a problem. I guarantee you're going to have your phone ringing off the hook.
So the rules essentially we agreed on last week related to parcels from 1 acre up to 11 acres in size is a 20-foot setback from all exterior property lines and 50 feet from any existing dwellings, excepting dwellings on the premises that's grown the marijuana. So that's the question is do you want that same standard to apply for parcels less than 1 acre in size, or do you want something less?
Personally, I'd just assume we leave it indoor only. We're going to have enough of an enforcement issue and
Understand.
People's going to be out there with measuring tapes and roll the property lines off.
I mean, the biggest complaints that generated this whole thing that brought it into this room was people trying to grow on small lots in concentrated areas. That's the reason why we're even talking about it now. And all I can say is you're really opening up a lot of, you're going to be having a constant flow of complaints coming in here.
So,
Let's just take a couple of comments.
sounds good.
I have one, I have Sharon Dillinger. That's the only card I have at this point.
My name's Sharon Olsinger. I live at 710-260 Tamarack in Levitt Lake. I've been growing for the last 6-7 years. I've had no complaints at all from neighbors. I don't bother them. They don't bother me. What I don't agree with is the 1,000 feet setback in the housing areas in Levitt Lake, because that would rule up half of Levitt Lake. The 500-foot setback, which was actually done by the 215 and the 420, I believe it is appropriate in the areas where there's housing. I mean, it's just a little community. It's nothing. There's no different from that than there is from the city housing area. And 6 plants is fine with me. I mean, where I grow, I have a 6-foot fence all the way around my house. I also have a fencing where my plants grow. So it's a double fence. It might be, it was a dog pen, and I went out and bought 10-foot poles, but it's still, and then put the 8-foot wires, it's to protect that and protect anybody else.
Now, where that is on your property, where you have it, let's use that as an example if we could. How close is that to?
I have one of the larger lots in
How close
Levitt
is that
Lake.
to the closest?
Daycare.
No, not daycare. I'm talking about a dwelling.
Dwelling?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Somebody's living in a house in the adjoining property, how close is that to this part of your parcel that you've got?
Where my plants are, I've got 50 feet from my back property line to where my fence starts, that's around my plants.
Okay, so you're.
And I have 34 feet from one side, from my property line to that fence where my plants grow, and I have 25 feet on this side from the property line to where my plants grow
Now,
inside.
on the 25-foot side, that's your closest you are to your property line. How close from that fence line is to the adjoining house that would be in your neighbor's property?
Oh, I'm sure it's 50.
No, let's count.
No, I'm sure because I have the bigger
Yeah,
property, I'm
yeah.
sure it's 50 feet, if not
Okay.
larger, because I want it outside my back door so I can see it in case
Sure,
anybody
I
gets it.
appreciate it. What I'm trying to do is to cite, this is your parcel, okay? This is your parcel, and you've got your, let me find a piece of paper that's blank that I can, here we go. So this is due as an example. You said there's 50 feet here, and there's 25 feet here, and there's 34 feet here. So I'm going to use that as the example. So this is your grow area. Now you got 20, this is your closest line to the property, okay?
Okay.
How far from this property line to where the house would be on the adjoining property? I think what we're talking about is at a minimum, okay, there needs to
Probably
be.
another 30 feet.
Okay, well then that's good. That would give you 55 feet, and what we're talking about as a potential would be fine in terms of the setback. If your neighbor was within 10 feet of their
But
property,
it isn't on the other side.
well, this side here, you've got 34 feet, so that house,
But you got it turned around, so the
Yeah.
25 feet would be on the other side, which the house is closer to the property. No, wait a minute. Okay, where you don't, okay, that's the front, 25 feet, and he's okay with my grow. I am about 30 feet away from his house. The other side, which is further into my yard, but their house is much more closer to my property lines, is probably 20 feet, 15 to 20 feet.
The point that's being made is no matter, if this is your grow area, let's just, regardless of what from the fence line of your grow area to where
The other house
the
is
other
on the other.
house is,
Right.
has to be 50 feet. So that is, if you only have 45 feet between this line and where the house is, then you're going to have to adjust your line, and it's going to reduce your grow area because this line needs to be 50 feet. Whichever side has to be 50 feet from an adjoining.
Now, you do that for the larger areas, larger lots, but in the housing unit, it's no different from the town housing. How can you can't get 50 feet?
Well,
from your
right
gate.
now, this ordinance proposes that you have no growing inside,
Okay.
outdoor grow.
Right.
In that
I
kind of
can't do
concentrated area.
indoor.
Okay, I realize that. I'm saying, though, is what we're talking about is how do we craft this, so if we are going to allow, a limited grow in lots of less than an acre, okay, there's got to be at least a 50-foot setback. And what it's going to do is some people it's not going to have any effect. Other people, it's going to narrow their grow
Their growing
to
area.
a much, maybe this part of your property rather than that part of your property. And it's going to require that person, in some cases, if you have an odd-shaped half acre that you're living on, you may not have any area that's going to allow you to grow because of the unique shape of the parcel. But a standard parcel, theoretically, there's usually 20 feet setback to a property line here, 20 setback there. So most people are going to be away from their property lines. But in some cases, if somebody's living right close, they may even have a variance and they're living right on their property line, and that's an existing dwelling. Okay, and you decide to move in and put a growth spot that's within, less than 50 feet of where they're living. Okay, that becomes an issue.
I
That's what we have to
still feel
address.
50 feet it is an outrageous amount when you're in a housing area. I know what the city ordinance is. And the city ordinance is 20 feet, it's either 15 or 20 feet setback. But they don't have the house because all of the houses are so close in proximity.
Well, I have a 50 by 100 lot, 120 foot lot, just half a block down the street here. And where my house sits on my property, okay, most of the property to the south and to the east is open, but it sits within 10 feet of the property line. And my neighbor's house is 10 feet from their property line. So literally there's 20 feet from those two houses being close together. That's the reality of living in the city, okay? And people live on small lots. Probably on my parcel where my grape arbor sits in the backyard is about the only area where I could probably grow because that's the only spot I have that's